You're not supposed to be here." The words sliced through the warm air, cutting deeper than any physical barrier. Jasmine Carter stood frozen for a moment as the officer's gaze bore down on her, sharp and cold. It wasn't the first time she'd been judged based on her appearance, but today felt different. Today, her presence here at the ballpark would be met with an injustice she could never have imagined. She was just a woman, a coach to a local youth baseball team, helping them sharpen their skills on the field. Yet to the officer standing before her, she was something else entirely. He didn't know who she was, didn't know what she had been trained to do, or the power she held behind her quiet confidence. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside," the officer demanded, his tone growing firmer. "You're loitering. I need to ask you to leave." Jasmine's eyes remained steady, locking with his. He expected a nervous flinch, a sign of submission. He wouldn't get it. Instead, she straightened her back, taking a deep breath as she looked around the bustling field. Children, parents, coaches, all unaware of what was about to unfold. This was supposed to be a place of growth, a place where the future was bright, but it was also a place where racial prejudices still festered beneath the surface. She could feel the weight of the eyes on her, the whispers starting to ripple through the crowd as they watched her, a woman of color, seemingly under suspicion for simply existing in a space that was supposed to be welcoming. Her heartbeat steadied as she finally spoke, her voice calm, but laced with an underlying power that even she was only beginning to understand. "I'm not going anywhere. You don't know who I am." The officer scoffed, his confidence unwavering. "I know enough. Step aside, or I'll have to escalate this." Jasmine's lips parted, ready to reveal the truth. Her identity as a federal law enforcement trainer, someone who had spent years preparing agents for high-stakes situations, someone who could bring down corrupt systems with a single phone call. But she held her ground. She wasn't here to make a scene. No, today she would stand firm, silently teaching a lesson far more valuable than any confrontation could offer. As the officer made another move toward her, a voice interrupted, coming from the crowd. "Officer, I think you need to take a step back," a man said, his voice authoritative. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She recognized that voice. It was one of her former colleagues, a fellow agent, who had just walked onto the scene. The officer looked momentarily confused. Jasmine could see the shift in his demeanor, his hand loosening around his baton. "Do you know her?" the officer asked, glancing between the man and Jasmine. The agent didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to Jasmine, giving the officer a stern look. "Yes, I do, and I think you should let her go." Now, the tension in the air was palpable, the crowd still waiting for something to break, to see how this would all play out. The officer hesitated, his gaze flickering from Jasmine to the agent, as if trying to understand what was happening. It wasn't just the agent's presence that threw him off. It was the quiet authority that Jasmine exuded. She wasn't just another person to be dismissed. She wasn't some bystander waiting to be swept aside. She was someone who had been trained to outsmart, outlast, and outmaneuver, and she wasn't about to let a mistake like this stand without consequences. Finally, the officer backed down, his face flushing with embarrassment. He gave a quick nod, muttering something about not knowing. The agent turned to Jasmine, giving her a reassuring look before he spoke again to the officer. "Next time, I suggest you verify before you accuse." Jasmine gave a slight nod, then turned to the young players who had been watching from the sidelines, their eyes wide with curiosity. She could feel the weight of the moment. The lesson wasn't just for the officer, it was for them, too. It was about standing tall, about knowing your worth, and about never letting anyone strip you of your dignity. Jasmine walked away from the scene without another word. She knew this wasn't the end of the story, but it was a beginning. A new chapter of understanding, of accountability, and of justice. And for her, that was more than enough. I had always been able to sense when a situation was about to shift, but this felt different. The tension that hung in the air after the officer's retreat seemed to stretch, thick and oppressive. The day had started with promise, children laughing, the crack of baseballs meeting bats, the sun high in the sky, casting long shadows over the diamond. But now, it was as if the world had paused for a breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Jasmine Carter, having just been humiliated in front of the crowd, stood tall, though her mind was already racing, calculating, as it always did in moments of high stress. She wasn't new to adversity. She had been dealing with it for years. Her calm in the face of such aggression wasn't born from ignorance, but from understanding the power of patience and strategy. As the agent walked beside her, offering nothing more than a subtle nod, Jasmine felt a small flicker of pride. But her thoughts quickly returned to the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't even just about the officer. This was about a system that operated on assumptions, that used stereotypes to judge people without truly knowing them. Jasmine had lived in that system, fought against it, and now, more than ever, she could feel the weight of the work still to be done. As she walked toward the bench where the young players were waiting, she could hear their chatter, their voices filled with questions. They had witnessed what had just happened, but they didn't yet understand the gravity of it. They hadn't yet learned the lesson she had spent her whole career trying to teach. It wasn't just about sports. It wasn't just about training them to be good athletes. It was about teaching them to stand their ground, to never let anyone tell them they didn't belong. She looked at the faces of the kids, bright-eyed, eager, full of potential. They were at a crossroads. They could either learn to bend to the expectations others placed on them, or they could learn to challenge those expectations and rise above them. Jasmine took a deep breath, standing taller as she turned to face them. "All right, team, gather around," she called out, her voice firm but warm. The children immediately stopped what they were doing, forming a circle around her. They looked up to her, not just as their coach, but as a role model. She had never been one to sugarcoat things, but today, there was something different in her tone, something that spoke to the weight of the moment. "I know that what just happened wasn't easy to watch," Jasmine began, her gaze sweeping over the group of kids. "But I want you to understand something. What you saw wasn't right. It was unfair, and it was wrong. But sometimes, things like that happen." The children nodded, some with confused expressions, others with a quiet understanding. "The thing is, when people make assumptions about you, about who you are or what you're capable of, they're not always right. They don't see the whole picture. And you know what? That's okay. Because your worth doesn't come from what other people think of you. It comes from what you know you can do. It comes from the work you put in, the effort you give, the character you build." Jasmine paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "That's the lesson I want you to take away from today. Not just in baseball, but in life. People will always try to put labels on you, try to tell you who you are. But you get to decide that. You get to show them who you are through your actions, your integrity, and your strength." The kids stood silently, taking in her words. Jasmine could see the spark in their eyes, the shift in their understanding. It wasn't just about the game they were playing. It was about the game of life and the skills they needed to navigate it. As the session wrapped up, the kids dispersed, some heading off to get snacks, others talking excitedly about their progress. Jasmine stayed behind for a moment, staring at the empty field. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden hue across the diamond. It was a peaceful scene, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the day had marked the beginning of something bigger. Something that would change not just her life, but the lives of the people around her. She had always believed in justice, in fairness, in standing up for what was right. But today had reaffirmed her purpose. It wasn't just about teaching law enforcement or training agents. It was about training the next generation to stand firm, to rise above the limitations others placed on them. It was about empowering people, especially young people, to know their worth and demand respect, no matter where they came from or what anyone else thought of them. Jasmine looked back one last time at the empty field, then turned and walked away, a sense of resolve filling her with each step. The sun may have been setting on this day, but for her, this was just the beginning. I had thought the incident at the baseball field was behind me, but the truth was, it was just the beginning. The events that had unfolded earlier that day lingered in the back of my mind, like a low hum that wouldn't fade. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the city streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. I had always known that my work as a federal trainer wasn't just about training agents, but today I realized it was about something far deeper. It was about shaping the future. It was about showing others the power they held inside themselves. As I made my way home, I thought about the kids I had just left behind on the field. They were at the start of their journey, just beginning to learn the lessons that had taken me years to fully understand. But I could see it in their eyes. They were ready. Ready to face a world that didn't always see them for who they were, but instead made assumptions based on their appearance. I had been there before. I had fought that fight time and time again, in ways both big and small. And yet, the thought of those kids out there on the field, carrying the weight of their own futures, made me more determined than ever. The next morning, as I walked into the training facility, the air was thick with anticipation. The agents I had been working with for months were preparing for one of the most important assignments of their careers. We were in the midst of a high-stakes operation, one that could potentially expose corruption at the highest levels of law enforcement. The pressure was on, but I had always believed in the power of preparedness, of training with purpose. And today, I was going to push my team harder than ever. They needed to know that every move they made, every decision they took, could mean the difference between success and failure. "All right, everyone, listen up," I called out as I entered the room. The agents fell silent, their eyes fixed on me. I could feel their respect, but I could also sense their nervousness. They knew what was coming. This operation isn't just about gathering information. It's about understanding the system you're up against. It's about knowing the people in power who think they're untouchable. And it's about making sure we're ready for anything. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. You are here because I believe in you. You've been trained for this. But this isn't just about the job. It's about who you are. You need to trust your instincts and never let anyone, no matter who they are, make you question your worth. As I looked around the room, I saw faces of determination, but also of doubt. They were good agents, but they hadn't faced the kind of opposition that was waiting for them in the field. They hadn't been through the fires that I had. I knew that today was going to test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But I also knew they had something that could make all the difference: resilience. When you're out there, remember this. The system may try to crush you, but it's not who you are. It's just a set of rules and limitations designed to keep you down. Don't let it. You're here to break those rules, to challenge those limitations, and to show that justice can never be silenced. There was a moment of silence before one of the younger agents, a man named Ethan, spoke up. "But what if we fail?" His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, but it carried a weight that was hard to ignore. I walked toward him slowly, my eyes meeting his. "Failure is part of the process, Ethan," I said softly. "But you don't fail because you're not good enough. You fail because you didn't try hard enough. You didn't push through when it mattered most. And that's not going to happen on my watch. Not with you. Not with anyone here." I could see the doubt fade from his eyes, replaced by a quiet understanding. He wasn't afraid of failure anymore. He was ready to face whatever came his way. I turned to the rest of the group, my voice steady and commanding. "We're going to take this mission to the next level. You've trained for this moment. Now it's time to show the world what you're made of." The agents nodded, their posture straighter, their resolve hardening. I knew they were ready. But more importantly, I knew they believed in themselves now. As we prepared to head out for the operation, I felt a sense of purpose, of clarity. The kids on the field, the agents in the room, this was why I did what I did. To show others that they had the power to stand up for what was right, to break the chains that held them back, and to fight for the justice they deserved. This was just the beginning. The morning air was crisp as the team prepared for the operation ahead. I stood in front of them, watching as each agent adjusted their gear, their faces set with determination. The mission was about to begin, but the weight of the day before still hung in the air. The kids at the baseball field, the officer's mistaken assumption, they were small pieces of a much larger puzzle. But today was about action. Today, we were going to dismantle a system that had long been built on corruption and assumptions. As I looked around the room, I could feel the energy shift. This wasn't just any mission, it was a turning point. The agents I had trained, some of them just starting out in their careers, were no longer just students. They were ready to take on the challenge. They were about to confront the very system they had been trained to uphold, a system that sometimes turned a blind eye to its own flaws. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. The people we were up against had power, connections, and a deep understanding of how to manipulate the system to their advantage. But we had something they didn't: resolve. "All right, team," I said, my voice steady but firm, cutting through the tension in the room. "We've been preparing for this moment for a long time. You've all been trained to handle high-stakes situations, but today is different. This is personal. This is about making sure the people who abuse their power answer for their actions. It's not just about the mission. It's about justice. It's about showing the world that we will not back down when faced with corruption. I could see the agents nodding, their expressions hardening as they absorbed my words. This wasn't a game. This was real, and the stakes were high. But I knew they were ready. I had prepared them for this moment, and I wasn't going to let them fail. As we left the briefing room and made our way to the vehicles, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. Years ago, I had been the one on the receiving end of prejudice and injustice. But now, here I was, leading a team that was about to expose the very system that had tried to hold us back. The field had been a small battle, a personal one. But today, we were fighting for something bigger. The operation took us deep into the heart of the city, to a building that had long been rumored to be a hub for corrupt officials. We approached cautiously, knowing that every move we made would be scrutinized. The air was thick with anticipation as we took our positions, each of us knowing that the next few hours could change everything. As we entered the building, I couldn't help but notice the contrast between the cold, sterile halls and the warmth of the team behind me. There was no turning back now. We were here to expose the truth, no matter what it took. The agents moved with precision, their training kicking in as they navigated the building's maze-like corridors. But there was something else in the air, something intangible but powerful. It was the feeling of justice, of knowing that what we were doing was right. The deeper we went into the building, the more we realized how far-reaching the corruption went. It wasn't just a few bad apples. It was an entire system, built on lies and manipulation. But as we uncovered the truth, I saw something else. The resolve in the eyes of the agents I had trained. They weren't afraid. They were determined to see this through, to make sure that those who had hidden in the shadows for so long would finally be brought into the light. As the operation continued, we gathered evidence, piecing together a story that would send shockwaves through the entire organization. I could see the weight of the moment in the faces of the agents. This wasn't just a win for us. It was a win for everyone who had ever been wronged, for everyone who had been pushed down by a system that didn't care. By the time we had everything we needed, it was late afternoon. The sun had started to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets. But it didn't matter. The mission was complete, and justice was finally on its way. As we left the building, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We had done it. But as I looked around at the team, I realized something important. This wasn't just about the mission we had just completed. It was about the work that still lay ahead. The battle against injustice wasn't over. It never would be. But today, we had taken a major step forward. As we climbed into the vehicles, the city sprawled out before us. A city that was now just a little bit safer, a little bit more accountable. The work was far from done, but it was a new beginning. For me, for the agents, and for everyone who believed in the power of justice. The days following the operation were filled with a sense of accomplishment, but also a quiet reflection. We had done what we set out to do, expose corruption at the highest levels, bring accountability, and show that the system could be challenged. But deep down, I knew that this was only the beginning. The road to real change was long, and the battle was far from over. As I sat in my office late one evening, reviewing the final reports from the operation, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. The mission had been successful, but it had only scratched the surface of a much deeper problem. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the case files heavy on my desk. I had been doing this work for years, but this time felt different. It wasn't just about the mission. It was about the future. The future of the agents I had trained, the future of the system we were working to fix, and most importantly, the future of the people we were trying to protect. The young agents had done well. They had stepped up when it mattered, showing the resilience and determination needed to navigate such a high-stakes operation. But I knew the challenges ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. I picked up the phone and dialed Ethan's number. He had been with me from the beginning, one of the first agents I had trained for this mission. "Ethan," I said when he answered, "how's everything going?" There was a brief pause before he spoke, his voice steady but tired. "It's been a lot, Jasmine. A lot to process. But I'm doing all right." "You did get out there," I replied, a hint of pride in my voice. "You all did. But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." "I know," Ethan said. "It's just the way the system works, you know? It's like we uncovered something, but it feels like there's more hiding beneath it all." His words rang true. I had spent years navigating the complexities of law enforcement, constantly uncovering new layers of corruption and inequality. Every time I thought we had reached the bottom, another layer of deception would surface. The deeper we went, the more it seemed like the system itself was designed to protect those who abused their power. That's the thing about justice, Ethan, I said, leaning forward in my chair. It's not just about catching the bad guys. It's about changing the system so that the bad guys can't hide anymore. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I'm ready for that fight, Ethan finally said. Whatever it takes. Good, I said, a sense of resolve building within me. Because we're going to need every ounce of that determination. There's more work to be done, and it's going to take all of us. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The mission had been a success, but it was only a small victory in the ongoing battle for justice. The work we had done had exposed the cracks in the system, but now it was time to fix those cracks. And that wouldn't be easy. The following weeks were filled with more meetings, more strategizing, and more planning. We had the evidence we needed, but now we had to figure out how to use it to bring about real change. The higher-ups were watching us closely, waiting to see if we could take what we had uncovered and turn it into something that would make a difference. But I wasn't worried. I knew we had the right people, the right mindset, and the right strategy. And I knew that we weren't going to stop until we had made a real impact. One afternoon, as I was walking out of the office, I ran into one of the young agents who had been part of the operation. Her name was Sarah, and she had been with us since the beginning. Jasmine, she said, her face serious. Can I talk to you for a second? I stopped and turned to face her. Of course. What's on your mind? Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking. I've been thinking about everything we uncovered during the operation, she said. It's just a lot. I mean, it's one thing to go after the people we know are bad, but it's another to realize how deep it all goes. How many people in positions of power are protecting these criminals? Her words were heavy, and I could hear the weight of them in her voice. I know, I said, nodding. It's a lot to take in, but that's why we're here. That's why we do this work. To change the system, to expose the corruption, and to make sure that the truth comes out, no matter how uncomfortable it is. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes filled with a new understanding. I'm ready for that fight, she said, her voice firm. We all are. As I watched her walk away, I felt a surge of pride. These young agents were ready. They were ready to fight for what was right, ready to challenge the system, and ready to make sure that the changes we had started would continue long after the operation was over. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that we could truly make a difference. Hopeful that, together, we could change the future. The weeks that followed were a blur of long hours, endless paperwork, and strategic meetings. We had taken the first step toward change, but the journey ahead was uncertain. Every lead we uncovered seemed to lead to another layer of corruption, another dark corner of the system that needed to be exposed. But this time, we weren't just gathering evidence. We were preparing to take action. As the team worked tirelessly to piece everything together, I found myself thinking about the conversation I had with Ethan and Sarah. They were ready, but was I? The weight of the responsibility rested heavily on my shoulders. This wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about ensuring that the work we had started would continue, that it would have a lasting impact. The system we were fighting wasn't just a few bad individuals. It was a complex web of power and influence that had been in place for decades. But I believed we could bring it down, piece by piece. The phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Ethan. Jasmine, we've got something, he said, his voice urgent. What do you have? I replied, sitting up straighter in my chair. A new lead. It's big. This could be the break we've been waiting for. I'm on my way, I said. I stood up quickly, grabbing my jacket and heading out the door. As I drove to the location where we were meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different. This wasn't just another lead. This was it, the key to unraveling everything. I pulled up to the building where Ethan had set up the meeting. He was standing outside, waiting for me, his expression serious. What's going on? I asked, walking toward him. We've traced some of the funding, he said. It leads directly to some of the highest offices in the city. We're talking about people who've been in power for years. My heart raced. This was the moment we had been waiting for. How do we move forward? I asked, my voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside me. We need to go in quietly, Ethan replied. No flash, no attention. We get the evidence, and then we take it from there. I nodded. Let's do it. We moved quickly, entering the building with purpose. The halls were quiet, eerily so, as if the place had been abandoned. But I knew better. This was the calm before the storm. As we approached the room where we were to meet the informant, I couldn't help but think about the journey that had brought me here. Years of training, of hard work, of pushing myself to be more than just a product of my circumstances. I had fought against the very system that now seemed so fragile. The people we were going after thought they were untouchable. But today, they were about to learn the truth. No one was beyond accountability. We entered the room, where a man was waiting for us. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. He looked at us with a mixture of fear and determination. "You're sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "We're ready." He handed us a folder. Inside was the proof we needed. The funding trail, the names, the accounts, all the pieces we had been searching for. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. This was it. We had everything we needed to take down the network that had been hiding in plain sight for so long. As we left the building, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. But I knew the real work was just beginning. We had the evidence, but now we needed to use it. Now we needed to go after the people who thought they were untouchable. As I sat in the car, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Jasmine, we've got a problem," she said, her voice tense. "What's going on?" I asked, my mind racing. "Someone knows we're on to them," she replied. "We need to move fast. They're closing in on us." My heart sank. This was the risk we had known all along. We had uncovered a powerful network, but with that came danger. They wouldn't go down without a fight. "We'll be ready," I said, my voice steady. "We've come too far to back down now." As we sped toward the next phase of the operation, I couldn't help but think about the people who had been wronged by the system. The ones who had been pushed aside, their voices silenced by those in power. Today, we were giving them a voice. Today, we were taking a stand. The road ahead would be difficult, but I knew we were on the right path. The battle for justice was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a real chance to change things. And I wasn't going to stop until we did. The air felt thicker as the team gathered in the operation room, the weight of the moment hanging heavy. The evidence was in our hands, the names, the accounts, everything we had worked for. But something still gnawed at me. We were so close, but we couldn't stop yet. The network we had uncovered was vast, and it wasn't just the people directly involved who were at risk. It was the entire system that would feel the tremors once the truth came to light. "All right, everyone, we're at a crucial point," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "We have the evidence. We know who we're up against. But now we have to be smart. We can't rush this." I paused, making sure my words landed with the team. They were all in, no hesitation in their eyes. I had trained them well, and I knew they understood the gravity of what we were about to do. We go in quietly, gather more intel, and make sure we've got everything before we move forward. No mistakes. I turned to Ethan, who had been with me since the beginning of this operation. "Ethan, what's the status on the backup teams?" "All set," he replied, his voice calm. "We've got eyes on all the key players. Everything is in place." "Good," I said. I looked at the team once more, feeling the sense of purpose settle in. They weren't just here to take down a few bad actors. This was bigger than that. This was about shaking the foundation of a system that had held its grip on power for far too long. Remember, we're not just here to uncover the truth. We're here to make sure this never happens again. We do this right, and we change everything. With a final nod, the team dispersed to their respective positions, each of us knowing the role we had to play in the coming hours. I walked to the back of the room, pulling up the file on my laptop, reviewing the key players again. The names in front of me weren't just individuals. They were symbols of everything that had gone wrong in the system. But now, with the evidence we had, they were about to be exposed. We had been chasing shadows for months. But now, we had the light to shine on every hidden corner. It was time to take action. As I prepared to leave the operation room, I felt a sudden pang of doubt. It wasn't fear. I had been doing this for years, after all. But it was the weight of the responsibility, the magnitude of what we were about to do. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a movement. I had been in this game long enough to know that exposing corruption wasn't always a clean process. There would be people who would try to stop us, who would do whatever they could to keep their secrets buried. But that wasn't going to stop me. We had a purpose, and we were prepared to see it through. I looked out the window, the city sprawling beneath me, the same city that had been the backdrop for so much of the corruption we were about to expose. The streets below seemed unaware of what was happening above them, but that was about to change. As we moved forward, I knew we had to be smart. We had to stay ahead of the game. The people we were targeting would be watching us closely, looking for any signs of weakness. But we had something they didn't: resolve. The kind of resolve that comes from knowing you're fighting for what's right, for justice, for a system that actually works for everyone, not just the powerful. We made our way to the location, the place where everything would come to a head. My heart raced as we approached, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. We had trained for this. We had prepared for this moment. And now, it was time to act. The team took their positions, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. These agents were more than just a team. They were a family, each of them willing to put everything on the line for the mission. As I glanced around, I saw the same determination in their eyes that I had seen in my own reflection years ago. This was more than just a job to them. This was their chance to make a difference. The final preparations were complete, and as I stood there, watching my team, I knew that we were about to change the course of history. The doors opened, and we stepped inside, ready to face whatever came our way. The silence of the building was almost deafening, but it was also a sign that we were about to take control. With every step we took, we knew we were one step closer to exposing the truth. And this time, there was no going back. As we walked deeper into the heart of the operation, I could feel the shift in the air, the change in the atmosphere. We were no longer chasing shadows. We were confronting the darkness, and we were about to bring it into the light. This was our moment, and we weren't going to let it slip away. The building was eerily quiet, and as I walked down the hall with the team close behind me, I could feel the tension building in the air. We were about to confront the very heart of the corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for so long. Each step felt like it was drawing us closer to the moment when everything would change. I couldn't afford to let my mind wander. We had to be sharp, focused. This wasn't just a routine operation. It was the culmination of months of preparation, of pushing boundaries, of believing that we could make a difference. But it wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about proving that the truth would always find its way out, no matter how deeply it was buried. As we approached the conference room, I saw the telltale signs of a high-stakes operation. Agents positioned at key points, their eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger, their movements calculated and deliberate. This was what we had trained for. This was our moment. I took a deep breath, calming the rush of adrenaline that was starting to build in my chest. "We're ready," I said, my voice steady but firm. I could see the nods from the team, the silent communication between us. We were in sync, and we weren't backing down. As we entered the room, everything felt surreal. The people we were about to confront had always seemed untouchable, like figures behind glass, unreachable and impervious to the law. But now, they were in front of us, vulnerable, and for the first time in years, they had no control over the situation. They were about to learn that no one was beyond accountability. The head of the operation, a man who had been orchestrating everything from the shadows, sat at the head of the table. He looked calm, collected, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know when. As we moved into position, I made eye contact with Ethan, who stood by the door, watching the room carefully. He nodded. It was time. "We have the evidence," I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence. The man at the table didn't flinch, but I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten. "We know everything," I continued, stepping forward. "The network you've been running, the people you've been protecting, it's over. You can't hide behind your power anymore." There was a brief pause, a moment where the weight of my words sank in. The room seemed to hold its breath. I could almost feel the walls closing in, the truth bearing down on us. The man finally spoke, his voice cold and calculating. "You think you can take me down with a few documents and a team of rookies?" His laugh was low, dismissive, but it didn't faze me. He wasn't used to being challenged, to having his authority questioned. He didn't realize that his time had come. "It's not just about what we have on paper," I said, my voice firm. "It's about what's coming next. This is just the beginning. We've already contacted the right people, and they're going to make sure that justice is served." The man's face shifted for the first time, a flicker of panic flashing in his eyes. But it was too late. The moment of truth had arrived. He had been so sure of his power, his ability to control everything, that he hadn't even considered the possibility that he could be exposed. "You're done," I said. "It's over." As I spoke those words, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. We had done what we set out to do. The system that had allowed people like him to operate unchecked was about to crumble. But I knew that this wasn't the end. This was just one victory in a much larger battle. As we moved to leave the room, I could feel the weight of the moment settle in. We had done it. The truth was out. But the fight wasn't over. We still had a long way to go before the system was truly changed. As we walked down the hallway, heading toward the exit, I saw the team behind me, their faces reflecting the same sense of determination that had driven us from the start. This was just one step. The road ahead would be difficult, but we were ready. The system would be held accountable, and we were going to make sure of it. The victory wasn't just ours. It was for everyone who had ever been silenced, for everyone who had been pushed aside by a system that didn't care. We were the change, and we weren't stopping now. The days following the operation passed in a blur of meetings, briefings, and planning. We had broken down a corrupt network, but now, it was time to ensure that the system we had exposed didn't just dissolve into silence. I could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on me. This wasn't just about arresting people or uncovering the truth. It was about making sure that those in power could no longer hide behind their badges or their titles. The operation had been a success, but the real challenge was about to begin. The team was still riding the wave of victory, but I could see the glimmers of uncertainty in their eyes. The work we had done was important, but the fight was far from over. They didn't understand yet just how far this would go, how deep the roots of corruption ran. "All right, team," I said, as we gathered once again in the operation room. "We've done our part, but now it's time for the real work to begin." I paused, letting my words sink in. We can't let this be another moment of success that fades away. We have the evidence, but we need to make sure this case goes the distance. It's not just about getting people arrested. It's about breaking the system that allowed them to operate for so long. Ethan nodded, his face set with determination. "What's the next step?" he asked. "We're going to follow the trail," I replied, my voice steady but firm. "We need to make sure this doesn't stop here. We're going after the people who covered it up, the ones who thought they could operate without consequence. And we're going to make sure they're held accountable." As I spoke, I could see the resolve in their faces. They were ready, but I knew the journey ahead would challenge them in ways they hadn't yet anticipated. We had uncovered something big, but now we had to navigate the complexities of a system that would fight back. We weren't just facing corrupt individuals anymore. We were facing a structure that had been built to protect the powerful at all costs. And it wasn't going to let go without a fight. "We've got to be smarter now," I continued. "The people we're going after will do whatever it takes to stay in power. They'll try to cover their tracks, manipulate the media, and discredit us. But we have something they don't: proof. We're not just relying on whispers and rumors. We've got hard evidence, and we're going to use it to dismantle everything they've built." I saw the team exchange looks, the weight of my words sinking in. We go in quietly, methodically. We follow the paper trail, connect the dots, and we make sure every player involved is named and exposed. We do it the right way. We do it by the book. No shortcuts. We spent the next few days preparing for the next phase of the operation. It was no longer just about gathering evidence. It was about building a case that would stand up to the scrutiny of the court. The higher-ups would be watching, waiting to see if we could take what we had and turn it into something tangible. As we finalized the plans, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The deeper we dug, the more it felt like we were uncovering a network that was far bigger than any of us had anticipated. But there was no turning back now. This wasn't just about justice for a few individuals. It was about reshaping the system that had allowed them to thrive in the first place. As we moved forward, I knew the risks. We had already ruffled some feathers, but the real battle was just beginning. We were going after the heart of the corruption, and we couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The next phase was crucial. We needed to gather everything we could, solidify our case, and ensure that no stone was left unturned. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. The work was grueling, but we couldn't stop. This was bigger than all of us. It was about justice, about making sure the truth could no longer be swept under the rug. I felt the team's resolve strengthen with each passing day. They were no longer just following orders. They were invested in the mission. They believed in what we were doing, and they were willing to do whatever it took to see it through. I glanced at Ethan, who was still poring over files, his focus unwavering. "We're ready," he said, looking up from the paperwork. "We've got everything we need." I nodded, my heart racing. "Then let's do this." With everything in place, we moved to the final phase. It was time to bring the fight to those who thought they were untouchable. As we prepared for the next step, I realized something important. This mission wasn't just about the people we were going after, it was about the future. The work we were doing would shape the system for generations to come. We had the power to change everything, and we weren't going to stop until we did. The days had blurred together in a rush of strategy sessions, phone calls, and constant movement. We were getting closer to the end, but I could feel the pressure mounting with each passing moment. The evidence was solid, but it wasn't enough to bring down a system that had been carefully protected for so long. This was bigger than just exposing corruption. It was about creating a lasting change, something that would ripple through every layer of society. The last phase of the operation was about to unfold, and every decision we made now would determine whether we succeeded or failed. I paced around the operation room. The map of the city spread out before me, pins marking key locations where we'd strike next. Each pin represented not just a location, but a person, a decision, a move in a much larger game. I could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on me, but I didn't let it show. We couldn't afford hesitation. "We've got one shot at this," I said to the team, my voice steady. "We go in, we take them down, and we make sure nothing gets swept under the rug. This isn't just about us anymore. This is about everyone who's ever been." Silenced by the system, they all nodded, each of them understanding the stakes. They were ready, and I knew it. Ethan stepped forward, his expression sharp and focused. "We've got the locations, the backup teams in place. It's all set. We've been planning for this moment for months." "Good," I replied. "But we can't rush. We need to do this carefully, make sure we've covered every angle. One mistake, and everything could fall apart." "Understood," he said, his voice confident. As the team moved into position, I sat back for a moment, allowing myself to reflect on how far we had come. When I first started this journey, I never imagined it would lead me here, to this pivotal moment where everything we had fought for would either succeed or crumble. But we had the truth on our side. We had the evidence that couldn't be ignored, and we weren't going to stop until justice was served. The first few steps were executed flawlessly. Agents moved into position, discreetly, without attracting attention. The places we targeted were carefully selected, key locations where the corrupt leaders thought they were untouchable. But what they didn't know was that we were already steps ahead. As I stood back and observed the operation unfolding, I felt a sense of pride in the team. They were executing their roles with precision, each one of them committed to the mission, each one of them playing a crucial part in the grand picture. This wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about creating a new paradigm where those in power could no longer operate with impunity. Hours passed, and with every new piece of information we uncovered, the web of corruption began to unravel. The names we had once only whispered about were now out in the open, their crimes laid bare for everyone to see. The key players were falling, one by one, as the truth spread like wildfire. I couldn't help but feel a rush of exhilaration as the system we had been fighting against slowly started to crumble. But there was still work to be done. We couldn't afford to be complacent. Every piece of evidence we had was a stepping stone, but we still needed to ensure that every part of the operation was airtight. As the operation continued, I checked in with the team regularly, monitoring the progress and making sure we stayed on track. Ethan was in constant contact with the backup teams, making sure that every move was calculated, every decision made with precision. We were so close, and I could feel it. The weight of the moment pressed on me, but it wasn't the burden of fear, it was the weight of what we were about to achieve. By the time the final pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, the sun had begun to set, casting a warm golden hue over the city. But the work wasn't over yet. We still had one final step to take. As we gathered at the operations center to review the final phase, I could feel the anticipation building. This was it. We had the evidence, we had the plan, and now it was time to make sure the world saw what we had uncovered. "We're going live," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "We do this right, and everything changes." With that, we moved forward, ready to finish what we had started. The team was in position, and we were about to bring the corrupt system down once and for all. The city that had been a silent witness to the power and control of the few was now about to witness its transformation. And we were going to make sure that nothing would ever be the same again. As the operation moved into its final stages, the weight of the mission settled deeper into my bones. We had come so far, but the last step was always the hardest. The truth was out now. The system we had been fighting against slowly beginning to crumble under the weight of our evidence. But the work wasn't done. The team had executed their roles with precision, but it was up to us now to ensure that the changes we had set in motion weren't just a fleeting moment of success. This had to be the start of something real, something lasting. As we prepared for the final push, I gathered the team once more in the briefing room. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. We had made it this far, but the final phase would test everything we had built. There was no room for error now. "This is it," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the tension. "We've exposed them. We've done the groundwork. But now we have to make sure we finish strong. We're not just taking down a few bad people. We're taking down an entire system. And we have to make sure that system can never rise again." I looked around at the team, each face filled with resolve. They had seen the progress we had made, and now they understood the magnitude of the change we were about to implement. The battle wasn't just about uncovering corruption. It was about breaking the cycle, about ensuring that those who thought they were untouchable would face the consequences of their actions. Ethan stepped forward, his voice sharp with focus. "We have the evidence. We've done the groundwork. But we need to make sure it doesn't end here. We need to take this to the right people, the ones who can make sure this is felt in every corner of the system." "Exactly," I replied. "We have to go beyond just the arrests. We need to make sure the public knows the truth. We need to ensure that the people who have been harmed by this system finally see justice." We went over the final details of the operation, ensuring every step was covered, every contingency planned for. The last thing we needed now was to lose momentum. As we moved out, I felt a quiet confidence settle in. This wasn't just about us anymore. This was about the future, about creating a world where power could no longer be abused without consequence. The next few hours would be crucial. The team moved in quickly, infiltrating the key locations where we would make our final moves. It was quiet, almost too quiet, as we moved into position. We knew the enemy would be watching, waiting for any sign of weakness, but we had already anticipated every move. The groundwork we had done over the past weeks was about to pay off. As we gathered the final pieces of the operation, the clock ticked down, and the tension in the air was palpable. But I wasn't afraid. I knew we were ready. We had the evidence, the support, and the will to see this through to the end. The first few arrests were made swiftly, each individual caught by surprise as the truth came crashing down around them. I could see the shock in their faces as they realized that they were no longer in control. This was our moment, the culmination of everything we had worked for. But even as we watched the system begin to unravel, I knew we couldn't stop now. We still had to ensure that everything we had uncovered would be used to create lasting change. As the day wore on, I found myself reflecting on everything we had accomplished. The road had been long, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but we had made it. We had exposed the truth, and now we had to ensure that it wasn't buried again. We moved quickly, spreading the news, reaching out to the media, making sure that the public was aware of what had happened. It was important that this moment wasn't forgotten, that the lessons we had learned weren't lost. The system had been exposed, but now the real work began, ensuring that those who had suffered at the hands of the system would finally see the justice they deserved. As we left the final meeting, I glanced around at the team. They had grown so much throughout this journey. What had started as a small group of dedicated individuals had turned into a force for change, a team that wasn't afraid to take on the most powerful forces in the world. The world was watching, and we had made sure that the change we had fought for would have a lasting impact. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The system wasn't perfect, but we had made a dent in it. And I knew that we weren't done yet. The future was still out there, full of possibilities, and we would keep fighting until we had built a system that worked for everyone. As I left the operations center that night, I couldn't help but smile. We had done it, and this was only the beginning. The city was quieter now, the dust settling after the storm we had stirred. The people we had exposed were starting to face the consequences, but I knew this wasn't the end. It was never just about one victory. It was about making sure the system, the structures that had allowed corruption to flourish for so long, would never return to the way it was. We had torn down walls, but rebuilding a system of fairness and accountability would take time. It had been a long journey to get here, but now it felt like we were standing at the edge of something new. The first day after the operation, I received countless messages, phone calls, and emails from colleagues, from people who had been watching us closely, asking what came next. It was a mixture of gratitude, questions, and uncertainty. Everyone wanted to know what this meant, and I didn't have all the answers yet. But I knew one thing for sure. We couldn't stop here. "Jasmine, what's the next step?" Ethan asked, his voice clear, a sense of urgency still lingering. We had barely slept in the last few days, and yet his determination hadn't wavered. "We need to stay on course," I said, glancing at the map of the city we had laid out earlier. The web we had uncovered was vast, and while the initial targets were falling, we had to make sure every piece of the puzzle was in place. The public is going to demand answers, and we need to ensure the right people are held accountable. Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the map. "We've exposed a lot, but now we need to push for full transparency. The world needs to know everything." I stood, walking over to the window. Outside, the city was alive, as if unaware of the shift that had just taken place. But I knew better. Things were changing. Maybe not overnight, but every person involved in this operation had left their mark. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. "We've laid the groundwork," I said, turning back to face the team. "But now it's time for the world to see what we've uncovered. We can't let this moment slip through our fingers." The plan was simple, but the stakes were higher than ever. The higher-ups would want to bury this, discredit the evidence, and silence anyone who threatened the status quo. But I had no intention of letting that happen. We need the media on our side. We need the public to see this, to understand that this isn't just about a few bad apples. This is about an entire system that's been broken for too long. I walked to the door, pausing for a moment before continuing. "This is bigger than us. This is bigger than just bringing down individuals. This is about changing everything." The team was ready. They were all in. They had seen the corruption firsthand, and they weren't about to let it slip away. As we moved forward with the final phase of the operation, we kept our eyes on the prize. We couldn't let up now. The next few weeks would be crucial. We needed to ensure that everything we had uncovered wasn't just buried under the weight of bureaucracy. We had to make sure that every person, every organization that was complicit in the corruption would be exposed. There was no room for compromise. As we pushed forward, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led us to this point. The countless hours spent training the team, the sacrifices made, the moments of doubt. But now, standing on the other side of it, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. We had done it, and we weren't done yet. There was still more to uncover, more to expose. The work was never over. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. We had cracked the system wide open. We had shown that power could be challenged, that justice could be served, and that the people who had been silenced for so long would finally have a voice. As I looked out over the city again, the weight of it all settled in. The work we had done would echo through the years, changing the course of history. It wasn't just about us, and it wasn't just about today. It was about creating a future where the truth always won, no matter how deeply it was buried. And with that, I knew we had done something that would make a difference long after the dust settled. The weeks following the operation were filled with a strange sense of calm mixed with anticipation. The public had finally learned the truth, and the ripple effect was spreading faster than we had expected. The media coverage had been relentless, with every new detail of the corruption we exposed fueling more and more outrage. The people were demanding change, and for the first time, it felt like the system might actually have to answer for its actions. But as the dust began to settle, I knew the real work was just beginning. We had cracked open the door, but now we had to make sure it stayed open. The corrupt network we had uncovered was just one part of a much larger, systemic issue. It wasn't just about the individuals we had brought down. It was about the institutions that had allowed them to thrive in the first place. "Jasmine, do you think they'll be able to stop this?" Ethan asked me one evening as we sat in the operations center, reviewing the latest reports. His voice was calm, but I could hear the underlying concern. "I don't think they can," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "They've tried before, and they'll keep trying. But this time, We've got the evidence, and we've got the public on our side. It's too late for them to hide now." He nodded slowly, but I could see that he wasn't entirely convinced. The fight wasn't over, and everyone knew it. We had made progress, but the road ahead would be long and full of obstacles. The corrupt forces we were up against weren't going to disappear overnight. As the days passed, I continued to work with the team, focusing on ensuring that our efforts didn't lose momentum. We had to stay ahead of the game. Every person who had been involved, every organization that had been complicit, needed to be exposed and held accountable. I met with various agencies, coordinating efforts and ensuring that the system we had exposed would be systematically dismantled. The weight of the responsibility still sat heavy on my shoulders, but I had no intention of letting up. The fight for justice wasn't over, and we weren't done yet. Every step we took, every move we made, was one step closer to creating a world where corruption could no longer flourish unchecked. The real victory, I knew, wasn't just about arresting a few bad people. It was about changing the way the system operated, about making sure that those in power couldn't continue to abuse it. As I worked tirelessly with the team, making sure that the network we had exposed would be permanently disrupted, I began to see a shift. It wasn't just the media now. The people, the very citizens who had been ignored for so long, were starting to stand up. They were demanding more, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the system was on its heels. Ethan and I spent hours poring over the remaining evidence, ensuring that every detail was accounted for, every connection made clear. We were working to turn the public outcry into action, pushing for laws to change, for more transparency, and for real reform. "Jasmine, do you think it's finally happening?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet but hopeful. I looked at him, seeing the same exhaustion in his eyes that I felt in my own. But I also saw something else, hope. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, we were on the cusp of creating something better. "It's happening," I said, my voice steady. "We've made the first step. Now we just have to keep pushing." The team was more united than ever. We weren't just a group of individuals anymore. We had become a force for change. And as we moved forward, I knew that nothing would stop us from seeing this through. There would be setbacks, there would be challenges, but we would keep moving forward. This was just the beginning. The system that had allowed so much harm to continue unchecked was finally facing consequences. And we weren't stopping until it was completely dismantled. As I looked at the team, I could feel the weight of our mission settle in. This wasn't just about justice for a few people. It was about ensuring that this kind of corruption would never take root again. We had set a precedent, and now we had to make sure it held. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But as I stood there, knowing the people who had once been silenced were now finding their voices, I couldn't help but believe that we were on the right path. We had fought for this moment, and now it was time to ensure that the change we had started would endure for generations to come.